Hello everyone, my name is Megan Hutchison and welcome back to my Halloween costume build for this year. This is the first major sewing video and it's going to be a steampunk Jabot. So let's get started. This is a Victorian style neck piece, quite similar actually to the Renaissance ruff I did before, and it's actually going to use the exact same fabric. So the first thing that we're going to need to build is a base for the ruffle. And since I wanted it to have a little more strength, I doubled over my fabric, hence the folding you see here. I then measured out how wide I wanted the base of it to be, and this is of course half because it's folded over for symmetry, at the bottom and at the top. Or the bottom is about 1.5 times the width of the top. So once you're done measuring it out with the length and the different widths, then you can make a line, pin it in place so that it doesn't move around, and begin to cut your shape out. Now, once I had cut it out, there you can see it's now all unfolded and nice. I went and measured out a seam allowance to the inside because this was going to be folded over so the seams would be pressed inside of the piece so that they wouldn't get caught. I then clipped the corners so that they wouldn't get too bulky, always a good plan when you're making something with tight inward corners like this, and then started to pin the seam allowance in place. This is important in ensuring that it doesn't go anywhere. After this, I also went and pressed the seam allowance inside with an iron. Since I was using linen, it involved a lot of steam, and that would let me open it up again and pin it closed properly for the actual sewing. Now, to sew this piece closed, I just used a regular top stitch on my sewing machine. This is just a straight stitch, basically go all the way around. Handy tip for doing corners, sharp corners on a sewing machine, put your needle in all the way, lift up the presser foot, turn the thing, and then go as usual. Alrighty, the next step here was going to be to make the ruffle parts of this ruffle. So I wanted mine to have 4 tiers, which is why I have a pin at the top, at the bottom, and 2 in the middle, just for sake of measurement. Now, the width that you want your ruffle pieces to be is going to be at least 2 times the width of the base piece at that point when you're sewing it on. This will give it enough space for you to gather it up properly or pleat it if you're so inclined, and it will ruffle nicely. Now I'm making mine about, I think 6 centimeters was what I was going for this one, in terms of the height, and you have to remember always to include a seam allowance with this one, as we're going to hem the bottom of it at the very least. And I made it a little bit of a trapezoid shape as well, so that it would flare out nicely on the ends, but again, this is also optional. Now, the part that you didn't see, or that you won't see, is when I took some fabric glue to the outsides of this piece of fabric on all of my ruffle pieces so that the outsides wouldn't fray, because this is a very thin fabric and it wouldn't hold up to serious hemming. Alright, there we go, repeat times 4. Now turn a hem on the bottom side of it. I had some lace I was going to sew on, so I pinned it in place, and followed my machine's instructions for sewing on lace. This is actually a blind hem stitch, which is a form of zigzag stitch, so you want the inner side of it to be just inside the top band of the lace, and the outer side to fall just outside the top band of the lace. And that will secure your lace to your fabric very nicely. Repeat on all of the fabric pieces that you want to overlay lace on top of. So in my case, this repeated times 4. Aw, isn't it pretty? Now you have to go gather it, and this sort of pleating scheme was the thing that messed me up on my ruff, so I decided to just go with a simple hand gather for these ones. Hand gathering because the fabric is fairly thin and doesn't like when you abuse it too much with the sewing machine. So always make sure to use double thread when you're gathering fabrics for extra strength and stability. And just weave it through the fabric like that, cut the end off, and you're good to go. The next step is the fun part. You gather up the ruffle by pulling on the ends, and start by securing the ends to the outside of your base piece. This will give you a good anchoring point to start pinning it on to the appropriate spot. And once you've got the outsides pinned down, then you just keep messing with the ruffles and pulling on the ends of the string until it's tight, and pin it in place. And there we go. Now I'm going to sew these pleats down onto the base piece using my sewing machine. This is, again, just a basic straight stitch over top. Just make sure you're not catching too many of the pleats or breaking any of your pins, because this is a lot of fabric for a sewing machine to handle. And there you go. Now pin the other ruffles onto your base piece on their rows, exactly the same as you did with the first one. This is the next one on top, and here's what it looks like when all of them are complete. Now you have to have some way of securing the ruffle itself to your neck. Some people use ribbon. That's definitely a very viable option. I decided to make a band using some of the leftover fabric from making the base. So I just took a very long strip, about 4 centimeters wide, folded it in on itself a couple of times with a seam allowance, and made a big long straight stitch down the side, finishing it off by hand at the ends. Then I pinned it at the middle to the middle of the base of the jabot, and made a small rectangle out of, again, some more base fabric, pressing to the inside a seam allowance. Since there was a little bit of a gap between the band and the base of the jabot, I decided to pin the band in at the top fold of this new connecting piece so that it wouldn't slip anywhere. So I just sewed it with some tacks onto the edges and once in the middle to secure it in place. Then once that was completed, I again lined up the middle of the band with the middle of the jabot and folded over the top piece, pinning it at the middle to secure it initially and keep it straight. Then went around pinning it on the bottom side, and I actually tucked the corners in because as it was as a rectangle, the corners were poking out underneath the collar, and that would not do. So I then again just top stitched all the way around, and this secured it to the jabot base and gave it a nice detail on top. Now it is a fully functional jabot, but it's kind of plain apart from the lace. So I decided to make a cameo of sorts out of an old necklace that I had, I think from Spirit Halloween. So I got some ribbon and sewed it on down, and some of the leftover lace into a bow as well, which worked very well given that my necklace pendant had a curve in the back of it. But if yours is flat, or if you're using a cameo, if you want to include a bow, probably include it as separate pieces of fabric. And there we go, one fully complete steampunk / Victorian jabot. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had a good time, and I hope this video was informative to you in some way. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, in which I turn a whole bunch of Value Village clothes into Victoriana. See you later!